going on, everybody? What's going on, Darren?
Greg, how you doing?
Good. All right, guys. So, my favorite hour of the week, or not week, favorite hour of the month. It really is. Uh,
Mine too.
get to hang out with my buddy Darren, talk some cards, and this is a big month for the collecting community. Would you agree?
I agree. I agree. We got the biggest show of the year in a couple weeks.
Hmm.
I think it'll be fun to see everybody. It should be a really good show. I'm still trying to finalize my strategy and my plan, not for the show, but for what I'm going to bring and what I'm going to buy.
Sure.
But yeah,
Well,
I'm
and
pumped.
that's partly what we're going to be talking about today. Um, Now, you know, right off the bat, obviously we're talking about, the national, and a lot of people have talked about it, and people have said, are you going to do a preview video? You're going to do, your plans and all that stuff. This is basically going to be my preview video. The only other thing that I'll do is at some point I'll share my schedule of what days I'll be there, what my plans are for each night. I'll put that out at the beginning of one of my videos, but my pre-national video is really this. So, we're going to kind of talk here about what we're looking to get, what the plan is. Let me ask you this right off the bat. Do you you were at the National last year and you were at Strongville this year.
Yes.
Tell me how those two things are. Go pros and cons through the two and compare and contrast them for me.
Okay. Um, for the show itself, obviously, Nationals like um, 50 times bigger than Strongsville.
Hmm.
It's you've got, I think it's a lot different show, right? Strongsville was pretty much all vintage, um, which is what you and I and the guys that showed up. It's what we enjoy, but that's only a piece of the hobby, right? There's all the there's a lot of guys that collect modern, and the National has a lot of that, right? So the National, I would say, at least from what I saw last year, is probably 30% vintage, 70% modern. Maybe it's a little bit higher for vintage, but it's a show that is, I mean, obviously it's the biggest show there is, so it's a great show for everybody, right? Um, and I mean, it's just much bigger. Now, the thing I liked about Strongsville was it was convenient, right? It's right next to the hotel. We could all stay at the same place. It was easy. Now the National this year, especially because it's at that was it the X1 or whatever convention center. It's kind of out in the southern field of the airport, kind of all by itself.
Hmm.
I would guess it's going to have shoddy internet. My assumption is like when you land on the plane and you turn your phone back on and you're like waiting for like a half an hour and the thing just keeps doing this, waiting for a signal. I mean, that's where it's going to be, right? So unless they have Wi-Fi, then it's probably going to be a bad signal. Strongsville had a great signal, so it was really easy to pull comps, right?
Hmm.
Um, and Strongville was nice because when you're walking around Strongsville and you're like, huh, I want to show Greg this card, or I want to ask Chris from Missouri a question about this, or I want to ask Mike Moynihan about this. You just go like this. There they are, right?
Yeah.
National's different. Like last year at the National, there were like hours where I was walking around with me and my dad, and I saw not a single person that I knew for like hours, right? So
Hmm.
it's just much bigger. But the upside is more people are going. It's going to be a really good time, and there is more. If you're a vintage person, there's more vintage size wise at the National than there is at Strongsville, right? So
Hmm.
Strongsville is higher percentage, but just like sheer massive vintage, it's going to be more at the National, right? So that's kind of my thought of how I would compare them. I would say Strongsville is a fun place for us to go if you're big into vintage, and National is where everyone goes because it's got everything for everyone.
Yeah. So there's so many things you just said that now curious on follow-ups on. Um, so first off, the building is a very old building. In fact, my understanding, I'm sure it's been renovated and stuff, but I think it was like a tank manufacturing plant years and years ago. So it has a lot of history. The
Mhm.
does, and I know that there used to be like a Ferris wheel or something in the middle of it, but I understand that's been removed. Um, as far as the internet, so you're expecting shoddy internet. Now, because of that, how does that change your planning and your approach?
So last year, a bunch of people gave me a heads up before the national and said, assume bad internet. And I said, all right. So what I did was I created a spreadsheet, and across the top row, I listed all the cards that I'm interested in. And then down the left column, I put basically 10 through A. And
Hmm.
then in the, associated box of card and grade, I would put the comp range, and then I just printed it out and had it in my pocket. So
Hmm.
it had the list of all the cards, and then it had the prices. For, like what I typically would do is say, if I'm looking for something like from a grade perspective, I don't really care what the grade is. Depending, it just depends on how the card looks. But
Hmm.
based on budget, what I would do is say, okay, for this card, I want to allocate X amount of dollars for it. So then I would look at comps and say, okay, to get that card in the price range I want is probably going to be a expensive two, regular three, or a cheap four. So I put the price range for those three grades. I wouldn't put the price for all of them, right? Like, if I was looking at um, I don't know, if I'm looking at like say a 33 Gaddy Ruth, the green one, and I have the range of you know 1.5, 2, and 2.5. I'm not going to go through and figure out what a nine is because it doesn't matter, right?
Right, right.
So I'll put I'll put I figure out what the price of the card is that I'm willing to spend, and then I find the grade range for that price, and then I put the comps in. So that helped me last year a lot.
So let me follow up on that then. So when you're finding the comps, where do you, Darren, go to find
It
those
depends on the
folks?
card, right? If it's something that I really want, that's not super rare, but it was a little more expensive, so I've been saving up for it. Um, I'll look to see what the most recent sales were on eBay. I'll look to see what they're actually going for on eBay. And then I'll probably check vintage card prices just to see if, because every once in a while, with some of the vintage stuff, you'll have a card that has sold recently, a couple copies of it for a certain price, but then for some reason, every single one on eBay is like 50% higher, right?
Hmm.
So I'll gauge that and say, okay, look, well, I'm going to use what the most recent sales were as opposed to what they're going for on eBay because obviously I'm not going to pay a huge premium. So then I get the prices that way. On the rare stuff where there hasn't been a lot of sales, then I'll use vintage card prices because just it'll pull from a bunch of different places, and if I still can't find anything there, sometimes I'll go to PSA and pull up the card and look at the sales of that card in different grades and try to gauge based on what that card has gone for in either much lower grades or much higher grades, what it would
Hmm.
probably go for or what it would probably comp for. And at the end of the day, I think for me, the rarer the card, when I say rare, I don't mean like, hey, it's an expensive card that I could find that's rare compared to, a modern card. I mean something that's like if I see it and I don't buy it, I might not see it again for a really long time.
Hmm.
I'm a little less concerned about the comp or even the grade. It's just, can I afford it?
Hmm.
And is the condition, acceptable for the eye appeal that I would want?
Yeah.
So in that case, there really aren't comps. So I'll just decide, is it worth it or not?
Now, when you're negotiating with a dealer, so you've got your comp set, and you go up and you've got a card you're interested in, and the prices are high. Do you start talking about the comps, or do you just kind of say, what's your room, or do you make an offer, or I mean, do you use the comps in the negotiation usually, or do
Yeah.
you yeah.
Yeah. So if I see a car that I'm looking for, I'll pull my sheet out, take a look at it, right? And say, okay, here's where the comps are at. Then I'll ask the dealer, what do you at? I mean, if they have prices, great. If they don't, then, what are you asking for it? They'll tell me. And if it falls in my range of comps, what I usually do is something along the lines of just say, what's the best you can do on it? And sometimes, they usually will come down a little bit and all right, great. If it's considerably above comps, then I'll bring up comps. And last year's national, I brought up comps to a dealer and he got super offended by it. So I was like, all right, fine. Like, I'm not meaning to offend you. I'm just, you're selling a product and it's your business. And, I'm not interested in paying you thousands of dollars more than what it's worth just so you can make more money. Right. So let's find the middle ground. And he did end up, we went back and forth for a little bit. And the only reason I even did it was the specific card I was looking for. It was a tough one to find. I didn't really see very many. I spent probably my whole Saturday looking for this card, and I saw this one, and I kept looking for another one because
Mm-hmm.
I didn't feel like dealing with that dealer, but I ended up buying it from him anyways because he did come down on it. So for me, if it's a card that I could find, like hypothetically, let's say I'm looking for a, you know, 1960 tops Clemente, right?
Mm-hmm.
If I find one that I really like, and the person's asking too much, I'll ask them, hey, can you do it for X? And if they say no, I'll just go to another vintage dealer and find theirs, right? If it's a card that I'm looking around, and I can't really find it, I'll spend a lot of time making sure I look at all the different cases to see if it's there. I'll ask if there's certain dealers that I've bought from that have been very reasonable on their prices. I'll ask them, hey, do you have this, or do you know of someone that's got it that you could broker something, right? So that's typically what I do, right? If the vendor's asking too much and they're cocky about their prices, I probably won't buy from them unless they have a very specific card that I can't really find anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
And in that case, even in Strongville, there was a card I was looking at, and a dealer, he was asking like double comp, and I asked him if he could come down, and he said that, you know, the T205 Christy Mathewson in a 3, mine looks like a 7, so I'm gonna ask 6 prices, and I'm like, that's great. So obviously it's not a 7, because if it was, I mean, PSA screws up sometimes, but not. I mean, that's a pretty rough screw up, right? So, in that case, I'm like, okay, fine, I won't buy the card, right? I could find it again later.
Sure.
So, I mean, that's the way I look at it. Like, I try to get reasonable deals. It's not. I have no interest in trying to like burn a dealer trying to squeeze every drip of price out of it. Like, I don't. It's not worth it to me, right? Like, if it's a really big card and it seems like it's a little overpriced, then I'll push a little harder to get it more realistic. Because like, if I overpay for overpay for like a $500 card, okay, that's not great, but it is what it is. If I overpay for a card that's like 10 grand, then it's like, well, now we're talking, potentially overpaying by thousands of dollars. And to me,
Yeah.
that's a big enough thing to push back and negotiate. And one of the things that I'm getting better at this year is not jumping on it just because it's like, I know I really want it. It's a little too expensive and you won't come down on price. I'll buy it. I'm getting better at saying, okay, well, I'll look for it somewhere else.
Yeah. So you said something else a few minutes ago that said you said, yeah, last year you walked around with your dad a lot, and you may at times went a couple of hours without seeing people that you knew.
Mhm.
Now, your channel existed a year ago, and you watched channels more than a year ago, but I know that you're a lot different in your comfort and familiarity with a lot of people than you were a year ago.
Mhm.
How do you anticipate, like, how do you go shopping at the National? Are you planning on sticking with your pop again, and you guys just kind of wandering around and whoever you come across, or do you think you'll be in more of a group or a couple of people you'll latch onto? What's that kind of look like for you?
I'll probably stick with my dad and my brother on the floor for the most part. Now, we, like the three of us, will probably attach up to different groups of people as we see them. And then I think, now that they've both been to the national also, if I'm attached up and we're looking at certain cards with a group of folks, and my dad and brother are like, yeah, we're gonna go look at something else, then they could break off and go do their thing. But yeah, I don't have I don't really have an intention of really kind of bailing on them at the show. Like, I'll be with
Hmm.
them on the floor for the most part.
Hmm. And in your experience, when you've run across other people, do you tend at the national, is it just a, hey, how's it going? You chat and then you just kind of keep going? Or do you find yourself at times like, hey, giving advice to so and so, or they want you to look at a card with them and you head over? Like, do you just kind of stick on your path and stay with your path? Or what do those meetups look like?
It just depends, right? Like, there last year, there was a couple guys that were like, "Hey, I found a car I really want, but the dealer's not coming down on the price." So I'm like, "Oh, here, let me go with you to negotiate, and I'll pretend I found it somewhere else for cheaper, right?" And right, or like, somebody's like, "Hey, check out this car that I really want. You want keep it?" So I'll step away and take a look at it, and I mean, to be honest with you, it's kind of like how I was in Strongsville, right? Like, I would say half the time on the floor in Strongsville, I was walking around with people, and half the time I was kind of walking around on my own, just checking stuff out. And then
Hmm.
I would, bump into people as I was doing it.
Hmm. Now, you had also mentioned a couple minutes ago that you made a list with a bunch of comps, and the list was all the cards that you were thinking about. How many cards do you anticipate going in this year on your list? And is it like, I mean, I think we all prioritize what we're interested in. We're like, well, I really want this and this, but there are these 10 that I'm interested in. Like, do you find yourself putting too many cards on your list or not enough cards on your list, or how does that work?
So last year's list, I put like, I was, Goldilocks and the Three Bears. I nailed that middle one last year. I literally bought every single card on my list. I built the list perfectly and came out just right. Like, I bought all the cards when I got done with the last one. I was like, cool, it all worked in the budget and everything.
Hmm.
This year is different. Last year, I think the average price point of my cards, because last year there was like 11 or 12 cards on my list, and the price point per card was lower. This year, I've got the list, and it has like a kind of line of delineation where I've got three or four cards that I'm looking at that are bigger, and then I've got some cards that I need to pick up for my wife's Mickey Mantle run that she doesn't have yet. Um, then I've got some cards that are on my original list of like 50 that were a lower price point, just to pick up some additional, just kind of fun, more interesting stuff.
Hmm.
So this year, I don't know how it's going to play out. I mean, last year there was a little bit more focus on sticking to the list for me, because I was planning to do my top 50 countdown, my top 50 player countdown. Um, we just hit number 3 the other day. Hang
Yeah. Yeah.
so it's almost done. So last year, I basically had my list of cards where it's like, hey, these are the cards I still need to get, so I have the right card to show that I want to show for the player. So it's a lot more focused. This year, it's like, okay, I have all these cards on my list, but if I get there and find like a super, like a dream card of mine that I haven't seen for sale for a long time, that is priced in a price point where I can say, you know what, I'll just use all my funds for this one card, then maybe I'll do that. So this year, I
Yeah.
don't think I'll stick to the list as closely, but I do still make the list and price stuff out. So assuming that, that somewhat off chance of finding like a grail card that's reasonably priced doesn't happen, right? Like, that's probably unlikely. But
Right.
just assuming that doesn't happen, then I've got my list and I've got the cards, and I might not buy all of them. I might just buy some of them. And to be honest with you, too, like if I can't find the cards, the bigger cards at a price point I'm willing to pay, I'm fine leaving the national with fewer cards and cash left over. I don't have to. I don't have to. You know, I don't have to deplete all the national funds at the national.
Right. Now, how would you compare your budget from last year to this year? Is it bigger, smaller? It's about the same. Like, and how?
Mm.
Because we've talked a little bit about this, and I've seen a few videos of different guys that have done some pre-national talk, and they've kind of mentioned how much their budget is, and how each person determines their budget. I find that fairly interesting. I know you've been saving for a little while, kind of since Strongville,
Yeah.
especially. How does that? How do you determine what your budget's going to be?
Um. So my budget's about the same as last year. I mean, it might be a couple thousand more, but it's pretty close to last year. Um, I determined it by basically, so remember I was doing my countdown of my cards one a month. I haven't done one in a couple months because I
Hmm.
literally, there was a couple months that I picked up more than one and I didn't show it till the next, but I don't think I've bought a big card I don't think I bought a big card. I'm trying to think, maybe since Strongsville. Maybe I bought one since then, but I don't think I have. So I've just been putting it away, and to set my budget, it's you know 2 weeks from Wednesday, whatever's in that account is my budget.
Yeah, yeah, and we had talked about that before, and that's kind of what I was getting at. And the way I budget completely changed based on your advice and conversations we had, which is to have a separate account for your cards
Hmm.
and to move money over to that. And then what I did is, so I started doing that, and then I was like, yeah, but now I find myself just spending it. And you said what you do is you take some, when it gets to a certain point, you take some of that money from that card account into like a goal card account,
Mm.
and so you move money over to that, and I started doing that, and that has really helped me because I have two accounts. One is my goal cards, which is basically my national account.
Right.
And then the other one, it's like I have over here. So when I go to a card show, I'll bring some money. And then when it gets built up a little bit, then I just take it and I put it into that one. And it just keeps me, it keeps me from just doing a slow drain, you know?
Yeah.
It's really worked well.
Yeah. That approach. I mean, that's the approach I found to not like there hasn't been anything that I mean, to be honest with you, if I've seen a card somewhere that I'm like, ooh, I have to have it, I'll probably end up buying it even though I'm trying to save up for the national, right? So that normally helps me a lot. Like that approach when I made that tweak, it really helped me a lot to basically view like one of the accounts is like it's almost like my Grail account or goal account or whatever we're going to call it. It's almost like a 401k, right? It's like I can't touch it. It's there. You could look at the value.
Yeah.
You can't really do anything with it. I kind of view that as it's kind of how I view that account. Not that it's an investment for retirement or anything, but it's more of an account where there's money in it, but I don't touch the money.
Hmm. Yeah, that's a good way of explaining it, like a 401k like that. You
I don't want
monitor
people
it.
thinking that I'm talking about that I invest in baseball cards for my retirement planning.
Right.
I don't do
Right.
that.
Right. This is all extra.
Yeah.
Um okay, so now let's start getting a little bit more into some more meat and potatoes instead of hypotheticals.
Okay.
Now, what are some of the cards, and I know a lot of people go in with like one card or two cards that they're really focused on, and I let's just start with that. So the flaw or the issue that can arise when you go in really planning on a couple of cards is kind of what happened with you at Strongsville.
Hmm.
Is you had gone in with a couple of cards that you were like, I really want to land these couple of cards, and one of them wasn't in the room. It wasn't at the show. And then there was another couple, and neither one of them was there one that either fit your eye or the dealer was in the stratosphere in which the card should be valued.
Right.
And so that basically put you in a spot where you're like, well, now what? Because I came for these, and these aren't, you'd have to force it to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And now what do you do? So that's the one concern, or one thing that I'm really working on, is I went into Strongsville with about 6 or 7 cards on my list,
Mm-hmm.
and I was able to get a couple of those cards, and that's all I was hoping to get is I was like, if I can get a couple of 1 or 2 of these 6 or 7. But if you go in with too strict of a thought process, it can kind of be a problem. So,
Mm-hmm.
um, circling back, how many cards are on your list, and what are the sorts of things that you're targeting?
So I probably have, the way my list is last year, like most of the cards were like range plus or minus like 30-40% price wise. They were all about the same. There's a couple that were a little bit more. This year I've got about 2 bigger ones, and then maybe like 3 medium, and then maybe 3 or 4 smaller. But I think really it's more of less of the specific card, more of so there's some players that I'm collecting this year, right? DiMaggio, Gehrig, and Jackie Robinson. So if I find a good Gehrig or a good Robinson or a good DiMaggio, then I'll pick it up. So I've got those. I've got a few cards from each of those guys on the list. I'm not going to buy all of them, but I got a few on the list from each of them, just so if I see one that's a good deal, I'll have my comp spreadsheet in my pocket.
Right. And then, in addition to those 3 players that you're kind of looking at, you also are looking at cards for the Mantle run,
Yes.
which Mantles are going to be a lot more plentiful
Mm-hmm.
at a show like this, because anything from the 50s and 60s, they're going to be a lot more of than, a Gehrig, for example, or a DiMaggio.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, I'm struggling. I'll be honest with you, and maybe you can give me some feedback and some
Okay.
input and some suggestions. But I sat down the other day with just a notebook, because I was going to start comping stuff. I mean, because it's a couple weeks away,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm like, I started writing down cards, and I look, and all of a sudden I had like 25 or 30 cards on my list.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm like, I'm now right back to where I was a year ago,
Yeah.
where I had no direction. So I'm trying really hard. And then I kind of I've had the notebook just kind of sitting there next to my chair in the living room, and I'll look at it. And what I found is I've been trying to like prioritize. And since I've started doing this, I've added about 5 more cards.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm
Okay.
like, okay, it's getting worse.
I said
Like,
it didn't work out.
but the thing I like about that, though, is that the chances of me finding one of
Mm-hmm.
the 30 in the price point, and as I'm sitting here thinking, I'm like, oh, there's another one. Like, one card that I've wanted for a while is I've wanted a Dr. J rookie,
Mm-hmm.
um, 72 Julius Irving, and that's not on the list, but it should be, because it's something I want. But it's like, if there are 30, I'm probably going to land something. But
So I would say this is what I would do if I was in that situation where I had a lot of cards on the list, and obviously you're not going to buy all 30. Well, I don't think
I'm
Megan would
not.
appreciate it if you bought all
She
30.
wouldn't.
Right, right. So what I would maybe do is how many days are you going to be at the actual show? Are you going to be there for 2 days, 3 days, like on the floor walking around?
Wednesday, Thursday, Friday.
Okay, cool. So what I would do, Wednesday, walk the floor. Don't really, I mean, unless it's absolutely don't buy anything, just walk the floor and figure stuff out. Thursday, go back and say, okay, when I walk the floor, some of the bigger cards I wanted, I think I found a couple. Now I got to decide which ones of those I want to buy. Go back Thursday, buy those, right? And then Thursday night, you could take a look at what you bought that day, take a look at the list, and then say, okay, I bought the big ones. Now on Friday, you can go back and say, okay, this is how much money I have left over, and I could pick up some of the smaller ones. I think that if you go in there knowing you, if you go in there and start picking up a bunch of the ones that are lesser on the list, you're gonna be like, shit, I got like 15 really cool cards, but one or two of these big ones, I really wanted to get one. I ended up not getting them, right? So maybe go after a couple big ones on the first day, and then just figure out what budget you have left for the stuff on Friday.
I think that's a good idea. The concern I have is I've heard a lot of people say when you see the card that you are looking for, buy it, because if you don't buy it, it'll be gone when you come back, or you won't be able to find it when you try to come back.
And that's true. I mean, I think the not being able to find it, I would agree if it's somebody else bought it. It's not, I mean, I would say, you know how there's some people where you're like, hey, to get to where you're going, before we had Google Maps, you just be like, yeah, you go to here, make a left, and then they just go there. And there's other people where you're like, hey, you've driven to this place like 20 times. Why are we lost? Right. I think those people are more like the ones that'll be like, I can't find it. Right. It's like, if it's a card that you really like, you look up in the on the ceiling, and it'll tell you like it won't, most of the tables don't have their table number like showing. Some do, but most of them don't. But you can at least look up and be like, okay, I'm in section, last year, I guess I'd say, like, I'm in section 3000. There's 1000 there, over there. So, I'm going to go to the right of section 1000 in the middle section. Like, you get close, right? It'd be like at Strongville if you saw a card and you're like, okay, I kind of remember it was in the middle. Was it this dealer or that dealer? It's like that times 5, right? So it's like, okay, I knew it was somewhere around here. And you go back and find it. Like, you're not, especially if it was a card you're like, wow, you're going to remember, you'll look around, you'll remember the dealer's face, you'll take a picture of it. And I think worst case scenario, you could just go ask somebody that works there, hey, can you pull up and let me know where this dealer is, right? So I don't think not physically finding it's going to be an issue. Somebody could buy it. So, I mean, you could modify my advice and say, when you walk the floor Wednesday, if you see one where you're like, dang, that's like your spawn, your 49 spawn, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you see something like that on Wednesday, then buy it. But again, if you buy the bigger ones first, then you at least know what budget you have for the rest of the show.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. I mean, yeah, because I'll give you a quick story about what happened at Strongsville. Is when I originally walked the floor at Strongsville, there were again about 5 or 6 cards that I was really looking for, 6 or 7, and there were about 3 that just I wasn't finding in the room. Not one. I mean, they might have had the card, but it wasn't the card with the look or the grade or whatever that I was wanting. But what I did see was 2 or 3 cards that were not in my 6 or 7 that would have been in my list of 15.
Mm-hmm.
That I was like, man, that's nice, and that's a really good deal.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I did was, the first day I didn't buy anything in Strongsville, and I walked around and I was looking for those 6 or 7 cards, saw a couple that kind of were close.
Mm-hmm.
And then I was like, on the second day, okay, I'm going to go look for the cards that were not in the top 6 or 7, but seemed like a good deal and were nice. And they were all gone.
Yeah.
And so I was like, oh, okay. So now let's go back to the original list and let's look at those ones that kind of fit, and work from there. So, I mean, stuff will there are a lot of people that have been saving a lot of money for a long time for these few days.
But on the flip side, though, too, there's still, like, you might go there and be like, here's my list, big cards, medium cards, smaller cards on the list. You could be walking the floor and you could be like, cool, here's a M1014 Cobb. It's not on any of my lists, but I'm seeing the card and I'm feeling this card, so I'm going to buy this one, right?
Mm-hmm.
So there'll be, more than likely, there'll be stuff that comes that you could add to the list. If there's something that comes off the list, you could add to it. Plus, if you're like, hey, I found something, I didn't buy it, now I can't find it, you could always search, eBay and Facebook and everything
Yeah.
else and see if you could find a different one, right?
That's the one thing that I keep going back to is it's like if I don't spend the money, I I mean there was a card a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month ago, that if it was at the National, I absolutely would have bought it right there
Mhm.
on the spot. And it was an auction on eBay and it went for 20% less than I expected it to. And I'm just like, I never dreamed it would have gone that cheap.
Mhm.
And I didn't bid because the National's coming. If I
Mhm.
had known it went for that price, I would have bid. Now, the nice thing is the fact that there's no tax, right? So there's no sales tax, there's no shipping, and you get to see the card in hand. Go ahead.
For the most part, I definitely had a dealer charge me, the dealer not from Illinois, and me not being from Illinois last year, still charged me Illinois sales tax, Rosemont special district tax, convention center tax, and some other stuff. So there's a high likelihood you won't pay tax on stuff, but it's not a guarantee.
Yeah. But that's one of the best benefits. So, where I live, it's like 8.5% sales tax,
Mm,
and I'm not looking at the card in my hand. So I think I know what it looks like, but you don't really know until it's in
right.
your hands. So I'm like, on a big card, I kind of want to see it in my hands. And
Yeah.
it's 8.5% less than if I bought it online somewhere.
Plus, if you bought it on eBay, it'd be sales tax plus shipping, plus you have to wait for it to get authenticated, and that's a pain. So at least you get it and you can walk away with it. So no, I definitely think buying it at the National. I mean, and it's fun too, right? It's a memory, right? It's like the cards I bought at Strongville. Not only do I love those cards, but they're more fun because I bought them at Strongville.
Right.
Same with my pickups from the National last year. So I
Right.
agree. But I would say if you can get the right, like you said, for you and me, because my sales tax is the same as yours, right? So, you know, between sales tax and shipping on some of these cards, you know, even if you buy it at comp, you're getting like a 10% discount.
Yeah. Yeah, that's pretty big. Now, let me ask you a kind of slightly different direction. What is your experience with the National, and we could even include Strongsville,
Mhm.
on prices of cards compared to prices online? Like, do you feel like the prices at these big shows are better than eBay prices? We'll just use eBay because it's common. eBay prices, or are they higher than eBay prices, or what is your feeling like? Because I've heard people talk about the national premium tax.
So
It's like
yeah, no, and when I first got to the show last year, I started walking the floor, and after like 30 minutes, I was getting super frustrated. I'm like, everything is so much over comp. So I actually text Theo and was like, WTF, like this is how, like, where do I buy anything here? Like half these guys don't even want to negotiate prices and they're way over comp. And he was like, look, he's like, take your time, right? You've been on the floor for an hour. Like, don't rush it. Take your time, walk the floor. When you see stuff that you like, ask about it, right? He's like, and he was right. It took me about 2 hours to kind of get through a lot of the vintage area, because the one last year, a lot of the vintage was kind of in a similar area, right? It was mixed, but it was primarily that, right? So walk through there and kind of got a feel for it, talk to some of the dealers. But there's some dealers that, you know, I like to refer to them as their museum collection. They bring out their cards, they put them on display. They're triple comps. They won't negotiate. So it's like, cool, you're spending the money to be at the National and pay all these fees so people could look at your cards through the case, and you won't sell anything, right? I mean,
yeah,
there was, I literally last year, there was one of my bigger pickups. A guy had one in a 1.5, and it was a pretty nice 1.5, and he wanted basically what like a 5 or 6 was going for. And right across from him, a different dealer had the same card in a 5, and it was a really clean 5, so it looked way better than the 1.5. And he negotiated it down, and I paid less than what the guy with the 1.5 was asking. So I went over and said, hey, look, FYI, we've talked about this card 3 or 4 times now over the last 4 days, and you kept saying no. I ended up buying it from another dealer, and it's a much nicer card than the one you have, and I paid less.
The thing I love the most is whenever you're telling any of these stories, I know the dealers that you're talking about, and I know the cards that you're talking about. Like when you're talking about the overpriced card in Strongsville, I know what card it is, I know what dealer it is, which is hilarious. Now, which brings up a whole nother thing. Are there certain dealers that you're going to look on the map and go, okay, I want to hit these guys early because I know that they have reasonable prices and they have a lot of the type of stuff that I like. And I know that this guy is always overpriced. So I might not even look at his table the first day. Or are you just, I'm going to go up and down the rows. I'm going to look. I'm going to be consistent. I'm going to thoroughly vet through everything. Like, how's that work?
I'm going to go up and down the rows and thoroughly vet everything. Now, there are a few dealers that I probably will skip initially because I know that they don't negotiate and they're overpriced. So I'll just skip them. Right.
Mm-hmm.
And then maybe on day 2 or 3, I'll just look to see what they have. And if they have something that I want, then, and I can't find it somewhere else, then, I'll start the same game with them over where I ask them, can you do this price? No, it's too nice. It's too nice to come down. I have the best ones. All right, cool. Well, I guess I won't buy it from you again. Right. But, I'll look at everything, right? Because you never know, right? There's a dealer that'll have like 90% of their cards might be overpriced, and then they might have one that it's a little bit higher value card, so they can't mark it up percentage wise as much, so it's not as overpriced, and it might be tougher to find. So, then I'll look at it, but I like to look at everything because even if I'm not buying it, there's a lot of stuff that those dealers have. They're just cool to look at.
Yeah. Now, what about some of like the window dressing stuff, like the museum type stuff at the show or the PSA booth and the SGC booth? Like, where does all that stuff fall in the pecking order? Is that after you make your first lap? Is that after you've bought everything? Like, is it just wherever that falls in the rows? How
Depending on
how do
whether it
you?
falls in the row, but there's for me, acquiring stuff is fun, but if there's something that's really rare, I would rather risk not finding a card to buy just to go see that, right? Like last year's national, we went in and my dad and I were looking at the table, and I'm like, holy crap, everything's so overpriced at this table. And then we went to the next table, I'm like, everything's overpriced here. So maybe it wasn't 40 minutes, maybe it was like 2 minutes, and that's when I text Theo, and then my dad's like, hey, come here, come here, come here. I'm like, what? He goes, just come here. I'm like, all right. I walk over, and he's like, look. And I look down, and I'm like, huh, the T206 Honus Wagner, sweet, right?
Yeah.
So, um, I was like, that's awesome. And I stood there for probably 10 minutes looking at it, and then I walked around some more. Then I saw a table that had a bunch of vintage stuff. I'm like, oh, I need to check that out. But you know, Heritage Auction is right here, right? And that's when they had the Mantle 9.5, the 52 and the 9.5
Hmm.
on display, right?
Hmm.
So I was like, oh, I'm going to look at that first, right? Obviously, that's not going anywhere, but I want to see that, right?
Hmm.
Um, they had the complete set of the Ramleys on display, so that
Hmm.
was kind of cool. So yeah, I mean, I enjoy. I would say for me personally, my favorite part of the national is spending time with everybody. My second favorite part of the national is actually seeing really cool stuff. And then in third is acquiring stuff for my collection, right? Because I'm not at a point yet, budget wise or even collection wise, where the stuff I buy is, I could only get it at like the better auctions, right? There's still so much stuff that, I could still pick up. So if I get the card or not, cool. I want to go there and enjoy it and have fun. And for me, seeing really, really cool stuff and spending time with people to me is more fun than ending up acquiring the card, right? So that's the thing. There's not enough stuff to see to not have time to do that. Plus, you're there for 3 days. But
Hmm.
it's just, it's just neat to see some of that stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I can't. I think all that's great. The thing, as you were talking about the order in which you go, the analogy that kept popping in my head is like Disneyland. Now, living in California, we go to Disneyland quite a bit because it's close by. But like, there are certain people that just go through Main Street. They go, okay, we're gonna do everything in, you know, this land, and then we're gonna go to this land. We're gonna do everything in this land. And then there's other people that go, no, no, no. The best ride is that one. So we're going to do this first,
Mm-hmm.
and then we're going to do that next, and then we're going to do that, and they kind of do it that way. And that's kind of the way that I'm thinking about it. I think I'm kind of more of a do my favorite rides first person than just, go through all of Frontierland all at once and then Adventureland all at once type
Mm-hmm.
of guy. Um, and again, there's not a right way or a wrong way, which is why I find the whole thing to be an interesting
And
topic.
I agree with you. That's how I am. But for me, the best rides are to go to some of the big auction booths and just
Mm,
look at some of the really, really cool stuff they have in upcoming auctions.
hmm Now, how do you expect this year to be different than last year because of just relationships that you've built, and having been there before? Like, if you were to say, what do you think will be different this year than it was last year? What would you say to that?
I think one of the things that'll be different this year for me is I last year it was more there was more of like a line of delineation. I'd either spend time with my dad, my brother, and my buddy John, or I'd spend time with YouTubers. And I think this year it's going to be a little bit more meshed because I know, like, I basically met everyone in person for the first time that I met at the National. That was the first time I met them in person, right? So,
Hmm
um, it's different now. Like, I know people, so there'll be a little bit more like I think intermingling, which will be fun.
hmm
Um, and then I think outside of that, I think it'll be somewhat similar. I mean, my last year was in Chicago, so nothing against Cleveland burbs, but I had better food options last year.
No. Does your dad is your dad and brother, are they excited to meet some of your YouTube pals? Because did they do much of that last year?
No, I don't think they really met anybody last year. I think they're excited to they're excited to meet you for sure. Like they don't watch. They watch my stuff, and then they'll watch videos of people who I do collaborations with.
Hmm
Um, so I don't know if I would say the term is excited. They're definitely like, yeah, that's cool. They're excited to meet you. But I think in general, they're excited to go. They're excited to see everything. I think, for them, it'll be cool to, meet people that they've watched videos of before. That they'll think that that's fun.
hmm
Um, and then I think, for them, you know, it's just kind of the same as me, right? The most important thing for them is spending time together, and
hmm
then next is seeing really cool stuff, and then third is potentially picking some stuff up for their collections as well.
Does your dad and brother do they have lists? Do they have cards that they're targeting? Because like, where are they at as a collector, and kind of how like, not motivated but enthusiastic compared to you? Like, are they very enthusiastic about picking up cards, and they have their lists and they're ready to roll and they have their targets, or are they just more along for the ride and they might pick up some things that they see are cool?
I think my brother is definitely more motivated. He has a list of cards. He's been collecting all kinds of different things recently. He's kind of changed up his how he collects a few times in the last year, and he has a bunch of stuff that he's looking at. So for him, I think he's really excited to pick up some stuff as well. But I would say that my dad, he's like 95% excited to spend time with my brother and I.
Yeah.
And then if he picks something up, he'll pick something up.
Yeah. Because your brother is like a Ricky Henderson, like super collector, right?
Yeah, he loves Ricky Henderson. So he does that, but he also he has multiple kind of little collections. He collects Ricky Henderson stuff.
Mm-hmm.
He also collects kind of like the iconic golden age cards in PSA twos. That's his
Mm-hmm.
thing. He has a really actually pretty awesome collection of PSA twos. And then he also is collecting the Retirado, those
Oh
Venezuela,
yeah.
the
Yeah.
blue ones. He's been collecting those big time recently. He's been buying up all the ones he could find.
That's cool. Yeah, I haven't I obviously haven't talked to your dad. I talked to your brother on the phone that one time
All right, yeah. After we had
when
lunch.
I was in Colorado Springs. We were having lunch and he called, and so I stole the phone and was talking to him for a bit. That'll be fun to
Yeah.
get to hang out with him because I mean my dad is a pretty avid collector, and so I know he's got some targets. He's really big into the 56 and 57 sets right now. So
Nice.
he's got a lot of those, but there are a few that I know he's looking to pick up. So and it'll be fun for our dads to meet, right? That's
Absolutely. Yeah. No, I
yeah.
think it's going to be. I think it's going to be. I'm looking forward to it. I think I'm super pumped. They're really excited. I was texting with them the other day about maybe having them come on Friday night as well,
Oh
and
yeah,
and
yeah.
and they're in. So yeah, no, I think it'll be fun. I mean, to be honest with you, like the only thing that recently like is making me anything but like super excited about it is what happened the other day in Dallas. Like I get nervous
Yeah.
about you know when that kind of stuff happens. I'm not that's never good, right? So that's kind of
Yeah. Now
bring
if
me down just a touch, just because I feel bad for Ash.
Mhm.
Obviously, he's a great guy, and that sucks. And I think also in general, like I might even change my strategy and say I'll do less buying and then
Mhm.
buy it from other means because I don't want to risk dealing with that.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny you say that. I felt that way a little bit too. I mean, if you're listening, and I'm sure most people have heard at this point, but Ash Jai, who's a great guy, and I consider a friend. I've had him on the channel. I've spent time with him in Strongville. He was basically set up. He wasn't basically set up. He was set up, and a case of cards was stolen. And knowing the type of stuff he has, that the case that was taken was well over $1 million worth of cards, and hopefully that they obviously apprehend the people and get the cards back, but it does absolutely put a damper on everything. And
Mhm.
I think just one of the ways that us guys are wired is to be kind of protective, and to be make sure that like when I go places with my wife and my two, teenage daughters, I'm always kind of like I'm checking my surroundings at all time, because I feel like that's part of my duty. And
Mhm.
there are times that when I see certain things, I'll move from being on this side of them over to the other side, and situate myself in a way where there's a buffer, and they're like, "What are you doing?" And I'll go, "Don't worry about it. Just keep walking."
Right.
And but that's how we're kind of wired. And then you're going with your dad who's in his 70s. I'm going with my dad who's in his 70s.
Mhm.
And then you hear about something like this happening, and we're in an unfamiliar place. I don't know Cleveland that well. I was in Cleveland briefly as I drove out of it for Strongsville.
Right.
But so you're in an unfamiliar place, and we were talking the other day, like, do you take cash or do you do PayPal? Well, and I think after this news broke, you texted me and you're like, well, this kind of answers that question.
Mhm.
Like, it's hopefully they'll take PayPal, and if not, then I can try to go make a cash run or something. So
Yeah, I mean,
it.
honestly, if they don't take PayPal, Venmo, or Zelle or some other app,
Mhm.
then I might not buy the card, honestly. And I think after this, I really think that I think a lot of them choose not to. I think they should choose to do it, right? Because
Yeah.
that helps them too, right? Because you can't it's a lot harder for somebody on the floor to rob your digital account,
Hmm.
right? Then it takes let me rephrase. It takes a much more savvy, technology focused thief to steal your money from your digital account than it does taking somebody that says, "Hey, you two guys go talk to him and distract him, and I'm going to go grab his cash bag," right?
Hmm.
So I think it's
The
safe
cash,
for
the
everybody.
cash flow
Class.
issue is so difficult because there's so much money coming in and going out
Mm.
that that to and it's wild how the tax situation is set up where if I as a collector have a card that I like that I have that's $1,000 and I don't want this card anymore, I want that $1,000 card. If I trade them, then we're good. But if I sell my $1,000 card, um, and there's records of me selling it, then I have to pay all these taxes on it, and then I have to pay all these sales taxes on the card that I'm buying,
Mm.
and so when you to go from $1,000 card to $1,000 card, you're really going to end up going from like $1,000 card to a $700 card after all of that.
Mm.
Versus if you just trade them,
Mm.
it it's invisible, and so that amount of overhead is a game changer for dealers, for businesses, for prices, and
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure, and that's the thing that's tough is like I, you know, I feel for them, and that is rough. And I think you know if they take cash and there's something I want to buy with cash that's not crazy, I'll do that. But I'm much more hesitant in the last 24 hours to do cash purchases for bigger stuff.
yeah.
I mean, I'll be honest. Like, if somebody comes back and says, "Hey, I can do PayPal, but I'm going to get charged the fee," I'll say, "Fine, charge me for the card plus the PayPal fee. That's fine. I'll
Mhm.
pay the fee." Like for me personally, I would rather pay the fees. Rather pay the credit card fees, the PayPal fees, whatever fees they would incur. I would rather pay that and have the peace of mind that I'm not carrying cash around.
Yeah, yeah, fair point. All right, bud. Well, it's been
Cool.
about an hour. So now a couple things I'll throw out there. As always, we do two videos now a month. One is on my channel, one is on yours. The We flip flop who has the guest each month. So keep an eye out if you're watching this on my channel. Keep an eye out for in the very near future. There's going to be a video of us with a special guest.
Mm-hmm.
So check that out over on Darren's channel. It will be easy to check it out on Darren's channel if you're subscribed to Darren's channel. He is quickly approaching 1,000 subs, so help him get to that point. And I know you have some cool stuff happening once you hit 1,000, so
Yeah,
people
I'll do
can
a
be on the
giveaway.
lookout for that. So, all right, dude. Well, I'm gonna go ahead and close this out.
Good.
I had a blast as
You
always.
too. Good conversation.
So, yeah.
We stayed on topic, so I don't know. We need
We
to double.
kind of did. We kind of did.
Yeah.
So I'm proud of us.
How's the weather in California? Let's just get off topic in the last 30 seconds. It's a little warm.
It has been 105 degrees or more for like 10 straight days. Right now, right this moment, it is 104 degrees. And tomorrow, let's see, tomorrow's down to be down to 99, and then it's going to go 106, 112, 106.
Yikes.
So,
Oh, that's crazy. Are you guys
yeah.
having like rolling blackouts? I mean, I'm assuming everybody's using their air conditioning.
They've done that at times. They haven't been doing that yet this year. I'm not sure
Okay.
why, but yeah. But soon I'll be in lovely Cleveland, where hopefully
Right.
the weather won't be as warm.
Yeah, crank the AC at the hotel. You're good to go.
Yeah, hopefully it works.
Yep. Yeah. Yeah.
All right. See you, bud.
All right, Greg. Thanks, everybody.